At some point, you're going to fail. Failing is really, really important. I remember growing up, I used to think, oh yeah, failure is a terrible word. You know, you've always got to be number one. I went through school high performer. Did all the exams, GCSEs. Then it came to doing senior school exams. And so I sat the exam and I failed the exam. And then I failed again and again. And I remember that kind of bitter disappointment and thinking that, my life was over. And I was on my last chance, which is I think the fourth attempt at the exam. And I passed the exam. I was determined that I was going to make something of myself. And so that tenacity and that ability to hang on is something that is really, really important. You're either going to be successful or you're not. And if you are successful, you would have learned something along the way. If you're not successful, what you have learned is that there is a different path and there is always something for you.
How have you been able to navigate this system that was built about people like us in mind?
I think it's having mentors, role models, and people who are going to lead you by the hand, show you the way, allow you to negotiate your learning curve, and also be there to support you no matter what. And that loyalty and that conviction and commitment to your success is really, really important.
What's the framework for getting a mentor?
I think we have a responsibility, those of us who have become successful or come out of the other end. When you get to the top of the building, it's your duty to push the button and send the elevator down. So I think we need to be open to the idea that we are beacons and pillars for people, and people are looking up at us. From a mentee's perspective, I think it is being willing to be vulnerable so that you can say, these are the challenges that I am having. If you come into this mentor-mentee relationship thinking as a mentee that you don't have much to learn, you're not going to learn anything. But by being vulnerable, you're able to explore where your strengths and weaknesses and where those opportunities are for personal growth and development. It is a relationship where one side has to be understanding and the other side has to be willing to be vulnerable so that you can actually meet in the middle.
What's your view on life?
Where can I start?
I've been reading the comments and DMs, and they have filled with beautiful messages about how much you've enjoyed watching and listening to these conversations and how powerful the stories have been. But here's the problem. Over 90% of you watching are not yet subscribed, and I know you're watching. So please hit that subscribe button to join our podcast community and help us attain our goal of reaching 2,000 subscribers in the next 2 months. Thank you.
Hello, Dr. Femi.
Thank you.
How are you today?
I'm great. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. I have to say I've been following your work, and when the opportunity came for us to connect, it was just wonderful to eventually get to arrive at this stage. And even that chance meeting at Armadale Hospital where we reconnected, it was great to meet and just this opportunity to, I guess, talk about different things and just go on a bit of a journey of discovery.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for agreeing to come on this podcast. Not a lot of people will avail themselves the opportunity. But yeah, thanks for taking it up, and I do really appreciate it. My hope is that after today, we want to talk about so many things. We have about an hour plus, max 30 minutes, an hour, 30 minutes to talk about a few things. Medical, personal life, journey, and courage as well. And my hope is that after this conversation, anybody watching this would understand you a bit more, but most importantly, will understand what it means to excel in a system that wasn't built with you in mind. Okay. Now, I've known you very briefly. I don't think we've known for long. The first time I met you would be November last year, November last year. And then I went and I looked you over. This guy. One thing that stood out for me was your humility. I don't know if you've heard that before, but for me it was a bit different. Noting that I've been around a lot of people as well, a lot of doctors as well that have excelled just like you. I've literally been told off for not putting the prefix doctor in front of a Nigerian doctor. Like when I called the person, like, I'm a doctor, you should add that. I was like, hey, you heard this before this. But I was surprised in your email you're asking, oh, just call me Femi. I still find that very uncomfortable to be honest, to call you just Femi. So allow me to just put it that way, doctor. But why is this so for you though?
So we were talking before, and you were talking about just work and jobs and things like that. I think what I do as a career is a privilege. I think that um, it is an incredible thing to be able to take people when they are at their most vulnerable, to befriend them, build trust, and guide them through to their recovery. But I also think that one of the things that makes a huge difference is being human, and building that connection. You can't ask people to be vulnerable to you if you're putting artificial barriers there. Look, I've trained a long time. I spent many years training, and that title doctor is, a marker, symbol of respect for the training. But I firmly believe that everybody who works in this world, whether it's the healthcare system or any other industry, we all have a role to play, and we're all parts of this machinery. And if we do that, I need to be able to respect what you bring to the table as well. And so, yes, okay, we can have the formalized doctor this and doctor that, but when I see people as colleagues, then that's when I'm saying, well, look, forget all of these titles. We're human beings. Let's have a conversation, because the substance of that conversation is much more important. Now, listen, there are cultural overlays. When you come from Africa and you come from our part of the world, there are only three professions. You're going to be a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer. And that really represents what that means to the society in terms of the level of learning and education. But I think there's also an aspect which is not about forgetting your roots, but also being adaptable. When you come out of that environment and you move elsewhere, things change. And I think it's also about being able to adjust to that. Even though I say to people, hey, just call me Femi, I do find that patients like to do that. I found it very strange myself. It's either call me Dr. Oshin, that's, or, if you're going to call me Femi, then, call me Femi. The in-between is something that has come along as I've, I guess, immersed myself a bit more in Australian culture. And, I don't take it as an offense now. I just take it as people really wanting to pay respect to that. And, that's very humbling.
Do you, in your opinion, think that honestly there is more to it than, so if someone was like, call me doctor, I do, honestly, personally, I do feel this level of emptiness that this person is literally being defined by their profession. So there is more to you than you being a vascular surgeon. I believe apart from the achievement you've had as a vascular surgeon, there are many other aspects of your life you've excelled. And calling you Femi doesn't in any way reduce your any of this achievement, any of these things you've done.
Yeah.
But it just presents you as the person I see it as this is you, regardless of any of this.
That's right, and I think I do like to reinforce that. My children don't call me Doc, and they know me in a different way. And so do my colleagues and things. But I think that when we start defining ourselves by our profession, we lose the humanity. There's one of my favorite movies is a movie called Patch Adams, with Robin Williams in it. And there's a line there where he talks about if you fight a disease, you win or lose. If you treat a human being, you almost always win.
Man.
And I think that's really stayed with me. I mean, I remember seeing that movie maybe about 20 years ago. That stayed with me, and I say that to medical students, and I say that to my trainees. And I think that it's really important to retain that humility, because at the end of the day, when you are with the patient, they don't care about your qualifications. They just want to be looked after.
Yes.
And when you develop that connection, that is what builds the trust. The trust is so key in medicine. Without the trust, people aren't going to give you that little bit of information that you need, that information which can make the difference between choosing one operation versus another. It's really about building that rapport. And you can't do that if you're this anonymous figure that's just defined by your work or your specialty. You've got to be a human first, and I think a doctor second.
I do agree with that, 100%. 100%. Look, I'd like to take us back a bit. I believe you've gone through different stages of life.
Yes.
And then here we are today in 2026, in April, talking or having this conversation. Take me back a bit to where you grew up, how you grew up.
Yeah.
You can talk about your parents if you have me to.
Yeah.
But take me back to the becoming.
Yeah. So I was born in Ethiopia. My dad, both my parents are from Nigeria, and dad used to work for the Nigerian Foreign Service, so we traveled around a lot. And at the time, both me and my brother were born. We were in Ethiopia at the time. So I was born in Addis Ababa, and we were there for a couple of years, and that's where my next brother down was born as well. I don't remember that because we then came back to Nigeria for a few years. I remember going to school there and living there. Then my parents decided that they wanted us to have a British education. At that time, nearly 40 years ago, that was, the peak of education, and, they wanted the best for us, and that's what all parents do. So we came to the UK, and then that sort of sets this journey that I've been on for the last almost 50 years.
So you were in the UK for how? You were in Ethiopia for how long?
Probably about 2 years.
2 years. You were born there.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Spent 2 years in Ethiopia. Moved back to Nigeria. Spent how many years?
Maybe about 4 years.
4 years. So that would be 6-ish.
Yeah.
And then moved to the UK from there.
Yeah.
And then
Europe.
Europe. Then you've been there for the last.
I've been there for nearly 30 years. Over 30 years in the UK. Did my schooling and medical training in the UK. And I came to Australia, and I was only going to be here for a year, but, Australia has this way of keeping hold of people. So
I was going to come to there. I have that conversation there. Now, tell me about your time in the UK. And what defined your stay in the UK? What was those memories like? Oh, I do really love about this place.
So maybe I'll divide that up. So when I was younger, I remember we came to London, and one of my earliest memories was the open air markets. I remember there's East Street Market in London, and I remember that was probably the first time that I had maybe seen or eaten an apple. And it was just hit with this wall of accents, the Cockney accents from the UK, and London's very multicultural, people from all walks of life. So I didn't actually feel like I wasn't at home there, because there were people who looked like me in London, all over the place. And, you could still get the same food that you eat in Nigeria at the same time as well. So that kind of feeling of just being immediately immersed into a society where it felt welcoming, I think, was one of my earlier memories of migrating to the UK. Growing up, lived in inner city London, and I remember my parents working really hard, and that wasn't for their benefit. That was always for...
Were they in London with you at the time, or
Yes.
back home?
Yeah. So, mum was working 2 jobs, dad was working a couple of jobs, and, it was always about the pride in doing something and working hard to give us a good education so that we could achieve and we could be the best that we could be. And that's something that I've carried with me and my children, in terms of saying, well, it's really important to make sure that you are well educated, that you're able to be whatever you can be, realize those opportunities and those talents that you have, and develop them and nurture them and watch the children blossom. And that's something that I took away from from my parents. But also, one of the things that I think I took away was, as an immigrant, I remember Dad saying, you've got to work, 5, 10 times harder because, it's not comfortable here. You have to really work to integrate and develop yourself. And that's where I think my work ethic came from, because I was surrounded by that. As soon as I was going out to work, I was seeing the work ethic of my parents, and, I was not frightened of, putting effort in, because that's what you need to do. And I think that's true of all immigrants, in that that's the immigrant story, is that you work hard, you're going to get your reward from it.
Interesting. I guess for many African parents, Nigeria in particular, the education is one thing they do well. Every Nigerian parents, no matter how broke, if that is right, they are, one of the key things they do is ensure the kids go to school. What price do the parents have to pay, or had to pay, to give you the life, or at least the education you had?
I think that, reflecting on this now, I think my parents gave up on their dreams for us. When my mum was younger, she trained as a chef, and she wanted to work in that industry, and there just weren't any real openings for her. And when I think back about my parents, and like I said, working multiple jobs, and working long hours, and it was all to make ends meet, but also put food on the table and demonstrate to us. So I remember Dad would go and work, all day, and he would come back home, and the first thing that he would do would be, okay, let's go and get your books out. And I hated it. Sitting there and you're doing repetition of maths and things like that, time and time again, and you're just thinking, why can't I go outside and play like the other kids? And that was the foundation that he was building in all of us, which we then took to school to then be able to achieve. If they had not put the effort in, and if they hadn't worked as hard as they did, and if they hadn't believed in the dream and what the end goal was, I think I would have struggled, because, there would have been all this talent and capability which was just wasted. At the time, as I say, I don't think I understood it. I just kept on thinking it was really unfair, and why couldn't I do what all the other kids were doing? And maybe, look, there's perhaps an argument to say, well, there's an opportunity to relax a little bit. But I think as an immigrant, particularly somebody coming into a new country without a huge amount of means and resources, there was no room to take the foot off the pedal. And I think that's something, again, that I carry with me, and I see some of that coming through. And when I look at my kids who are looking at me, and I say, yeah, I remember that look.
I'll ask you this question. I think I've asked the previous guests, and it's pretty much caused a bit of stir as well online, positively. It's about the questions you wish you had asked, you questions you wish you asked your dad. Is that still life?
Yes, that is it.
Good for you. Have you had time to sit with that?
No, one of the challenges is living in the UK and me living here. I think by the time I got to the stage where I was mature enough to really fully, deeply understand, we were living in separate continents, different time zone, and with COVID, it became a little bit more difficult to actually have. And these are the sort of conversations that I think you have face to face. It's harder to have that conversation, even with technology and FaceTime, to have that kind of conversation. And I think a lot of boys have funny relationships with their dad sometimes. There's a bit of rebelliousness, and when you're young, you wanting to go left and dad's wanting to go right, and there's always a bit of tension. And I think that kind of gets in the way until you have your own kids and you're experiencing it, and then you go, okay, I know why he was doing that, and I understand. And by the time you have that understanding, to a certain extent, a little bit of water has gone under the bridge, because you kind of think, okay, we've kind of moved on, you've kind of accepted the status quo. But I think the conversation I wish I had was really saying, I appreciate you. I understand what you were trying to do. There were hard lessons, and you were trying to be strong for me at that age, so that I can develop the skills and capabilities that I have now. I think that's what something we have Father's Day and things like that, but I think that's something that I think men, and maybe I might go out on a limb here and say black men, don't often do, or go back to say I appreciate you in a way that I think is powerful and meaningful. In order, as a parent, fathers are able to say, okay, I did right, because that's what you want to do as a parent. You want to be able to look back when your kids are growing up and you're looking at the successes and you're living life through them to say, okay, I did an okay job. Because when you start, you have no idea what you're doing. It's really tough, and you just make it up as you go along. And no two parents' experiences are the same.
It's quite powerful. It's very interesting for many of us as Africans, black fathers. Now, my father, I growing up, you realize only now you know what your dad was trying to do at the time. But also for our dad as well at the time, they didn't have better communication skills.
No.
It's just do it.
Yes.
Don't ask me questions.
Yeah.
And when we approach it that way, you often get rebellious kids, in quotes, at least at the time. And if care is not taken, it becomes, if not properly managed, rather, it creates that tension between father and son. And over time, you start seeing these divergent views, and boom, son not speaking to dad and things.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And I think that's one of the things. I mean, we've got to remember that as African parents, number one, they're a product of their time. Number two, they are also overlays of culture as well, which come into that, which is, this is how life has been for a long time. And African parents are often very conservative. There's a whole list of reasons for that. And because of that, there isn't often a huge amount of room for having some of those softer conversations, which it's natural for young people to be rebellious. They want to forge their own path, and then, you end up, at loggerheads. And you're right, if that isn't managed well, then you end up with this kind of gap that grows between the two of you, and you're going, well, now I'm old enough to live on my own. I'm going to go and do my own thing. I don't need to be told anymore. And what that creates is an underappreciation of the intent and the wisdom that they had, which is handed down from father to father and through culture, which, you kind of almost disregard in a way because you've been rebellious. And I think that's where, reflecting on this over time, I've been able to look at how I'm interacting with my children and my sons, to then say, well, how can I get them to a situation where you don't end up with this kind of divergence, but an appreciation of, okay, you want to go this way, that's fine, but there's another way that we can go as well. And this is my perspective, and it's a dialogue, to try and keep everything together. Gone are the times when it's do as I say. It is, yes, exactly. And those of us of a particular generation, we know what that was like. It's one way or the highway, and you were never going to take the highway until you were able to leave the house.
I had a guest previously, and similar conversations talking about this young man that's doing relatively okay, but he has his own view of life, stuff he wants to do, career path is chosen, of course the partner is chosen as well, all of other stuff, and then having this bit of course parents are always going to be parents. Then my question is, what I then was asking myself, look, we're not back home anymore, we're here, and kids here, I always say they are so favored. Because you can always retrace. Back home, when you're out of university, you miss it, you're probably not getting a job, like you're gone. So the best time is get out of school, grab any job at that time, because 2 years after, 3 years after, 4 years after, you're probably not going to get a job. Whereas here, I could go do everything I want to do, try everything I want to try, And I could still come back and I'll still be fine because there are a lot of opportunities I could lay my hands on. No sense. Why won't you let this young man just do his thing? Go figure out life yourself. Just know that I'm always gonna be here for you. Whether successful or not, you can always come back. We'll have this conversation again.
Yeah.
How are you navigating that with your kids though? You got son?
Two boys.
Two boys. Okay.
I think you're right. Here, we're privileged to live in a society where there are a multitude of opportunities. On top of that, with the career that I have, there is no doubt about it that my children are in a privileged position. They do not have the same sort of upbringing that I did. They're not going to experience the, okay, we've got to get up in the morning and, we're going to go and help mum at work because, they're not going to do that, so their challenges are different. And I think when you're absolutely right, when you're talking about the opportunities back home, which, you've got one shot. If you don't make that, then it's really challenging afterwards. And I think that is the driving force for the way our fathers were, because they knew that, they knew that you've got to go one way. And I think similarly, when you come as an immigrant, into another country, yes, there are opportunities, but because you're coming in as an immigrant and you're new into the society, your opportunities are less. And, and I think that's where you really need that drive to succeed. So I'm in the fortunate position with my children where I can just focus on education. Everything will just take care of itself, as you've alluded to, because giving them that strong foundation to be able to say, you can read, you can write, you play an instrument, you can do all of these things, you can experience all of these things because, you're in this privileged position. That's great. But I don't have the same job and challenges that my parents did, which is actually, once you've done your education, we also now need to put you on a path to actually get an employment. This is now a case of my job is done if they have got their education and, they're, because they will work it out for themselves because the society we live in will support that. And, that's one of the great things about living in a country like this, where there are these opportunities, and, I think there's less requirement to be entrepreneurial here than there is back in, Africa and Nigeria, because whilst there are opportunities, you have to seize it and you have to be much more aggressive. Whereas here, there are jobs that you can go into where you'll have a job for life, and you will be able to keep on going. That doesn't mean that people don't work hard. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is that there is a hunger that comes with living in that part of the world. And when you first come as a first generation immigrant, that hunger comes with you. And then each generation, it's a little bit more diluted because you're part of society and that's inevitable.
While you were saying that, a picture just came to my door. Just remember it. So after my secondary school, I think the first major job I got was to work in the bank. I worked at the first bank. I did a couple of years there. When we were invited for interview, guess how many people showed up?
A lot.
1,000 people. For how many roles?
I'd say maybe a handful.
I don't think they hired up to 50.
Yeah.
They looked, when I was invited, I mean, you would imagine for you to have 1,000 to get invited, it means there were several other 100,000 that applied that didn't make the cutoff. And then after there were 1,000, it was at Imo State University. That was where we did the interview. Then I got out. After the interview, I just left. I was going and was like, how am I going to qualify? Look at all these people. I was driving back to Enugu, which was where I was leaving at the time. I was in the bus at the bus park. I got a text message because I was never hoping. I never thought I would be invited back. But I got a text message while I was at the park, returning back to Enugu, that I've met the cutoff. I should come back for the round 2. I was so happy.
Yeah.
And that's certainly the reality for many people, especially in Africa, where you just got a shot. maybe 2.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Yeah, and so I think we touched on a really important point here, and it's something that is also very close to my heart, which is really about resilience. Because at some point you're going to fail. Failing is really, really important. Failing, I remember growing up, I used to think, oh yeah, failure is a terrible word. You've always got to be number one. We've got to go and, you set your maths exam, you've got to get at least 80%, because if you don't, then you're nowhere, the disappointment of coming home, all of these things. And so I grew up with a mindset and mentality that failing was a bad thing. And it wasn't. I'll tell you about my first failure. So I went through school, high performer, did all the exams, GCSEs, you did, scored very well, did more than most people did because I was capable of doing a lot. Then it came to doing senior school exams, and I sat those, and I was fully intending to, just sail through that. I had already started doing interviews to go to medical school. I decided I wanted to be a doctor, I'd chosen the subjects, etc. And when it came to the results came out, and I hadn't done well enough to get into medical school. And I remember that kind of bitter disappointment and thinking that, my life was over, that I wasn't going to ever, get to where I wanted to. I had this dream about what I was going to do with my career, etc. And so I decided to take a different path, and I did engineering first. And so, 2 out of the 3. So I did engineering and, got through that. And in my final year, I decided to reapply for medicine. And I got through. And the only thing that kind of kept me going was thinking, I can't give up. I wanted to do this, and I'm going to do that. And all the time that I was doing engineering, I was thinking that this is going to contribute in some way to my future career. And it did, because then I did medicine, and then I did my doctorate in the same departments that I did my engineering degree in. And, everything started to come together, and it just became complementary. And then I came here, and I was, and I decided that I was going to stay, and I had to sit the Australian exams again. And I'd already passed the UK exams, and it was one of those sort of hoops that you had to jump through. And so I sat the exam, and this is about when COVID first came, and I failed the exam. And then I failed again and again. And I was on my last chance, which is, I think, the 4th attempt at the exam. And I passed the exam. And it was a really harrowing time. This was only about three or so years that I was sort of sitting here, because the exams sort of sit every twice a year. And I remember sort of feeling this shame, and I was looking around at my colleagues who had sort of passed first time, and I was thinking, this is terrible, really knocked my confidence. But I then looked at my kids, and I was thinking, actually, what would they feel if I just decided to just give up and quit? And that was part of the motivation, was really got to do this. And even if it didn't work out, I was determined that I was going to make something of myself. And so that tenacity and that ability to hang on is something that is really, really important. And I don't think we should be scared of failure, because you learn things when you fail. I've seen so many different podcasts about people like Steve Jobs, and the process of reiteration, you try one thing, it doesn't quite work, and then you do it again, and you keep going. And it's really about keeping going. That's the important thing. And if I could say anything of value to young people coming through, trainees, in my own discipline or in any other discipline, is really stay the course, because at the end of the day, you're either going to be successful or you're not. And if you are successful, you would have learned something along the way. If you're not successful, what you've learned is that there is a different path and there is always something for you. What you can't do is just collapse into yourself and just curl yourself into a ball and just run away. There's no room for that. You have to, fine, take an hour to cry, get upset, whatever, and put yourself together and then go again.
You've hit a very important point for me. One of the reasons why I started podcasts, for me, I run business, right? So I've done a few things. Some succeeded. I think I've failed more than I've succeeded, honestly. One thing that became very evident, one thing that became very important to me was oftentimes as entrepreneurs or male entrepreneurs, they don't share their failure journeys. All we see is the successes.
Yes.
And so it creates this illusion that entrepreneurship is easy.
Yes.
Life is easy. I could just go pick up a product or start a business and boom, it'll blow, like they say.
Yeah.
But in actual fact, that's a big lie. Because for every successful entrepreneur, they've got like countless amounts of failures they've had to go through their life. They probably just, like I always say to myself, this doesn't matter how many times you fail, you just need one success to write every other thing correct, to write rewrite your history, whatever the wrongs, and things like that. But then that process of failing teaches you something about life. Just like you've just alluded, it teaches you resilience, staying the course.
Yeah.
It teaches you as well trust in your abilities as well.
Yes.
Knowing fully well that, yes, I've done this, I've failed, I'm going to do it again. I'm going to do it again till I succeed. Now, the time you succeed, it corrects this rewiring in your head. You're not a failure. You just learn how not to do it and how else that can be done.
And I think you're right, man. That last line is really where I really wanted to come to, is I think we get hung up on this word fail, and it's so negative.
It is.
And I think I understand why people use the word, but I would suggest we reframe it as it's a learning curve. Where's your learning curve? Because as you're doing that, failure is such a final thing. It's finite. And for me, life is just this journey of improvement. And you're always learning something. If you just think, okay, well, I'm going to get to this and I've achieved it and I've stopped, you can't rest on your laurels. And so when I'm doing something with my children, or I coach them sometimes with sport, and they're trying, to learn this technique, and they're getting fed up. I don't say things like failed or you haven't done it right. What I'm saying is that you're learning, and that does it's a different way of spin and putting at it. But when you say you're learning, that's positivity. And so that allows them to embrace that and just say, okay, it's not a bad thing. I didn't get it right this time, or I didn't get where I wanted to be this time. I'm going to do it again. But when you start saying it's a fail, I used to remember seeing those, those reports, and you get a big F in there, and you
like that, just there and there, enjoy your eyes, and everything in there.
and you remember that, and you feel so dejected when that happens, and you just you feel like an utter, but to be able to say, well, okay, try again, that's encouraging, and that's the lessons that I think has evolved from our previous generation. Is actually now we're talking in that kind of language, because we're encouraging to say, keep going.
Yeah. Was your choice studying medicine, was that out of parental pressure, family, or was out of your own desire?
I would say that I was inspired. So I remember very clearly the day I decided that I was interested in medicine. I think we were still living in Nigeria at the time. I think I was maybe 4 or 5. And one day, sorry?
I was very early.
Yeah. One day, Dad was drawing a picture of the human body, and he drew this chalk man on the wall, and you put in the digestive tracts, mouth, stomach, etc. I remember looking at that and just thinking, this is amazing. And that's when I became interested in medicine as a career. And it's just grown from that. And, every subject that I took, I was just learning more and more. And it was just that, I was good at a lot of things, but, biology and things that just stuck in my head, I could just remember it.
Yeah.
And and the day I decided I was going to be a surgeon was, when I was younger, and I used to help my mum cook in the kitchen, and, you get the chicken and you have to peel it and everything. And somehow I just found it easy to just, prepare the chicken, and I was thinking, oh, actually, I'm quite good at this. And I just knew how to get cut through the joints. And it was just, it just seemed to be, that was what I was made to do. And I think it's so rare to be able to do that. I've met a lot of people and friends through university, and they would say to me, oh, but you're so good at something, you could do a lot of things. And I said, well, that's actually quite difficult if you are capable of a lot of things, because almost the world, as you've always said, it's hard to choose. But I'm lucky that I had this one thing that I wanted to do that I could focus on, which meant that I knew exactly what my path was, and I could focus on that.
Do you feel are you happy? Fulfilled? Happy?
I am. I think I mentioned that doing medicine is a privilege, and there is, for me, no greater buzz than, somebody who is seriously unwell, and you make that human connection with them. And for me as a surgeon, being able to do something physically with your hands to rectify the problem, that's activism, I think, for me, in terms of doing something to help other people in an active way. And that's no disrespect to my colleagues who do medicine or use medication or do other things. But for me, that's where I get my feedback and my buzz, is actually being able to say, okay, here's the problem, I'm going to fix it, is instant feedback. So yeah, no, I do. I feel very fulfilled and happy. There is a price, the late nights, the getting home after the kids have gone to bed, the having to leave, in the middle of a family thing because you're on call and somebody needs you, and it feels sometimes like you're putting somebody else's needs ahead of your own personal needs or family. And that can be quite challenging. When I was younger, it was just, okay, this is exciting. And then kids come along and, you're still thinking this is exciting because they're really young. And then my kids are now at an age where they're interacting, and they'll be teenagers soon, and then they won't want to know me. They'll have their own friends. And I've just got this really narrow window to really sort of build, a strong relationship with them. So, and bless them, sometimes they say to me, there's somebody that needs your help, you go and help them. And that's, to have children that are able to understand that, even though they're kind of being left behind, putting other people's needs in front of them, it makes me very proud as a parent that they're able to have that level of understanding. But yeah, no, it's I think overall, nothing is ever 100%, but balance. I think I've got a good balance in terms of being able to do that, and being able to inspire them. I mean, for the first time, my children are now sort of looking at pictures on the TV and saying, "Is that what you do?" That, and I said, "Yes." Yeah.
Was it true?
It's finally interested.
Yeah. Look, if you were not doing medicine, what would you be practicing? What would you be doing, brother?
I really like being creative and using my hands to be creative. So I've thought about this before, and I think that I would probably be a builder. I like the idea of creating something that is going to be a legacy, or going to be of service or value to other people. And that engineering brain that I have in terms of problem solving, I think comes into that. I mean, I remember when I had finished my engineering degree and suddenly I looked at the world in a different way, and I would look at these buildings and say, okay, I can understand why they chose to do this, that, and the other. It's all of that starts to come into it. And, I've renovated homes that I've been in before, and I've always got stuck into that, and I've really thoroughly enjoyed that. So yeah, no, I think I'd probably be a builder, and probably not one that's just kind of sitting in the office. I'd want to be out there and doing something, because there's a lot of satisfaction after creating something that and something beautiful that is going to be, like I say, of value to somebody else.
Someone said something. If you look at a building, if you could get to building sites, at the foundation stage, it looks, if you're not in that space, it looks like a mess.
Yeah.
Because everything is all everywhere. Can't make sense of it.
Yeah.
And then piece by piece, the walls start coming together.
Yeah.
The lintel, the roof, and then it starts making sense.
Yeah.
And then for the builder, you're feeling fulfilled. Like this vision you had in your head, it's now live. And for the architect as well, that drew the stuff.
Yeah.
That's their greatest fulfillment. I heard an architect once say one of his greatest fear, how did he put it? Like, one thing he dreaded the most is after sketching and drawing up a plan of, a building, and never gets approved.
Yeah.
Breaks his heart.
Yes.
Because after putting that, you're always looking forward to seeing this thing put down on paper in reality, and then, that's me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. And I think it is that you have the vision and then you bring it to life. That's, I've number of times I've walked into disheveled home or house that I was considering buying, and I can see in my mind's eye the vision of what it could be. And, in that opportunity, when I've had the opportunity to bring that to life, that's, such a great buzz. And I think that's similar to me in medicine, is that seeing in my mind's eye, this is where the issue is, and then being able to realize that vision, to bring that into and fulfill that is it is just such a privilege. I'm extremely lucky to be able to do what I'm doing, and as I say, I think everybody has their role to play in society, and this is what makes me happy, and this is where I think I fit. But I think other people are able to do things that I can't, and I get no greater pleasure than watching colleagues do something that they're good at, or like I go and watch people play sports, and seeing people doing things at the top of their abilities is fantastic. And I think that's, for me, part of what I'm as a person, is really celebrate everybody else's victories, because as if they're my own, because it's about mutual appreciation of what people are able to bring to the table.
Look, briefly, quite a few things I wanted to touch about. I've never gone halfway. But briefly, I wanted to walk me through that decision. What was the calculation? That decision, when you made that decision to move from the UK to Australia, what was the maths? What was the calculation? What was the thinking behind it?
So
I'm assuming there are quite a few places you would have been.
Yeah, when I came to Australia, Australia's got and the UK have got a great relationship with my particular field in vascular surgery. So some of the iconic and the really important discoveries started off in Australia. Some of the ideas and that drove some of the paradigm shifts in the way we treat patients, and started in Australia, in Perth. And for a long time, there's been this kind of backwards and forwards of people from Australia going to the UK, and the UK coming to Australia. And I decided that I wanted to develop some additional specialist skills, which, it was going to be good to come to Australia, and why not? It's in the sun, you've got a new environment to live in for a while, and, come in and stay here for a year and then go back to the UK. And then within about 3 or so months of being here, so I was like, could I live here? Well, yes. And, and one of the complicating factors was that I had become a consultant in the UK, and the the plan was that I would come to Australia, pick up some new skills, come back and start to develop the diabetic foot service in the UK. And I came here and eventually decided, actually, I really want to stay here. And I could see, we talked about having a vision before, this idea that the children could flourish here, they could really get to have some opportunities that they wouldn't have back in the UK. So made a very difficult decision to give up the job in the UK in a unit where that was my first job as a vascular surgeon. I worked with some incredibly inspirational people there, and that was where I started my first job after leaving medical school as well. So there were a lot of emotion tied with that, and I felt like I was betraying colleagues by coming here and not going back. But I say, thankfully, I was able to get back to the UK last year, and I saw some of my colleagues, and it was really good to reconnect with them as well, and feel like I returned home.
Look, by all standards, you're very successful. All right, and I've looked you up. One thing I wanted to ask, a question that crossed my mind was, how have you been able to navigate this system that was built without you in mind? Now, when I say you, about people like us in mind. You've been in the UK, went from, of course, engineering, medicine, became a vascular surgeon, consultant, moved over here, and things have progressed from there. How have you been able to navigate those systems successfully?
I think the easiest answer to that question is mentorship. I have had some incredible role models throughout my career to date. When I was at medical school, I had two incredible role models. First one was a vascular surgeon called Linda de Cossart, and she is an incredible woman and very prominent vascular surgeon in the UK. And the lesson she taught me was reflection. So she had wrote lots of books about the thinking surgeon and how to cultivate a thinking surgeon. And in those books, she really sort of drove home this idea of never sort of resting on your laurels, which chimed with
Restful on your knowledge.
never resting on your laurels, and this journey of continuous improvement. And the only way you can do that is really by reflecting deeply. That's not just a superficial reflection, but just thinking about everything from your actions to how you're feeling, the psychology of it, your impact on other people as well. And that really helped me to extract everything that I could from my training so that I could be the best that I could possibly be. And that's helped me to navigate, that system to start going up the ladder. The other person that was really influential for me in the UK was a guy called Professor John Brennan, who was a vascular surgeon, he still is, but he had this kind of no-nonsense way of looking at the world. It is very clear. He's the sort of person that, the room can be really busy and people are talking, and then he opens his mouth and then everybody shuts up and listens to him. Just commanded authority, but always just spoke with common sense and clarity. And I'd often find myself in really difficult situations and I would think, what would John do? How would he manage that? And some of that humility and being down to earth, I actually think I owe that to him and his approach, really sort of instilling those values into me. And then when I came here, a huge influence on me is my colleague, Patrice Mupatai. So he's also a vascular surgeon, also an immigrant coming from, he's originally from the Congo, then trained in France and then South Africa. But he's been through some really challenging times, and he has always remained full of grace, and he also epitomizes resilience. And when I first arrived, he took me under the wing, just started renting the house with no furniture, gave me furniture. That hospitality, and, when I would need to go and work, he said, "Oh yeah, I can look after the kids for you." And he and his wife and his family were just incredibly supportive. And so when you ask the question, how do you navigate the system? I think it's having mentors, role models, and people who are going to lead you by the hand, show you the way, allow you to negotiate your learning curve, not fail, negotiate your learning curve, and also be there to support you no matter what. And that loyalty and that conviction and commitment to your success is really, really important. The glaring thing that I haven't mentioned are my parents, because I think that just goes without saying, and save the best for last, because without their commitment and their vision about what their children could be and their own personal sacrifice, we wouldn't be sitting there having this conversation today, because if they were less invested in our futures, we would have just come across as immigrants and we wouldn't have done anything. We wouldn't have realized our potential. So I'm eternally grateful to them for that, even if, and I think it's heightened by the fact that I think now that I understand it better with my own children, I'm beginning to scratch the surface of just what they did and the magnitude of the sacrifice that they made for us.
Now, for someone out there trying to, so first, what's the framework for getting a mentor? Because it's very important. It's easy to say get a mentor.
Yes.
How do I go about getting one that aligns with or understands maybe my journey?
Yeah.
And perhaps or in alignments, if there's anything like that?
That's a very good question. And I think one of the things that is really important, I think, is there are two things. It's a bilateral relationship between a mentor and a mentee. And I think, let's take the mentors first. I think we have a responsibility, those of us who have become successful or come out of the other end. When you get to the top of the building, it's your duty to push the button and send the elevator down. So I think we need to be open to the idea that we are beacons and pillars of hope for people, and people are looking up at us. And we need to embrace that. And I think having the opportunity to be here to talk about these things is part of that process. I've also been really privileged to have been elected as the president of the Genesis Forum, which is the Nigerian Doctors Association. And these are some of the conversations that we've been having, is how do we support the next generation of doctors who are coming through? You asked the question, how do you sort of navigate a system that's not necessarily built for you? Well, we need to create the environment for immigrants or other people who are coming into the system to be able to thrive and to survive. Because it is difficult when you arrive on these shores for the first time. It's a slightly different culture. You haven't formed any of these relationships. And that's part of what a mentor can do. But it's also about guiding and listening to be able to hear some of those things. And it's almost like a parental relationship in a way, to be able to say, in the way that we have just been discussing, is how do we have these conversations in a way that's sensitive and encouraging. You can't, as a mentor, say, do this or else. From a mentee's perspective, I think it is about, again, being willing to be vulnerable so that you can say, these are the challenges that I am having. If you come into this mentor-mentee relationship thinking as a mentee that you don't have much to learn, you're not going to learn anything. But by being vulnerable, you're able to explore where your strengths and weaknesses and where those opportunities are for personal growth and development. And I think that there's an opportunity for both mentors and mentees to learn from each other. So if I take the example of myself and Patrice in terms of our relationship, I came here almost 10 years ago. He took me under his wing. He has helped me enormously. All of those times that I was going through the exams, he would be there. He never wavered. And I get through the exams, and now I'm in a position where I'm able to support. And now he comes to ask me what my opinion is, and that's a really touching moment to sort of be in a position where I don't think of myself as being his equal, but it's touching to be in a position where somebody who's so vastly experienced is asking me what my opinion is. And that's a mark of mutual respect, and something that I think if we're able to do that, then we can work together to really, truly achieve greatness and overcome so many things. But it is a relationship where one side has to be understanding and the other side has to be willing to be vulnerable so that you can actually meet in the middle.
What's your view on life? Perhaps philosophy on life, if there's anything like that?
Where can I start? I always remember Dad saying, do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. And I think that's maybe one of my core beliefs is really, it's about grace and trying to understand where people are coming from. So I'll give you an example. I do a lot of work with Aboriginal patients, and a lot of them come to Royal Perth where I work, because they come from the Kimberley region, and there's a lot of health inequality for a whole range of reasons. So we had this poor woman who came to Royal Perth, and she's in Royal Perth, and she's away from her family, a long way away. It's colder here than it is there. She doesn't really know anybody. It's isolating. It's very frightening. And we end up in this situation where there was an altercation with nursing staff, and she had thrown some food in nursing staff. Now, that's not acceptable at all. Nobody should have to work in an environment where they are potentially subjected to violence. And coming into that situation as a doctor, I think you have a specific role as a doctor because lots of people are looking to you for leadership.
Yeah.
And the first thing to do is really try and diffuse the situation, support the nursing staff, explain to the patient that behavior is not acceptable. But then you have to go deeper and say, well, why did this happen in the first place? And it turns out, she'd been saying that she didn't like the food for a long time. It's not the sort of food that she's used to eating. And the worst thing that you can be is be vulnerable and hungry at the same time and have this food there which, you could eat it, but it's not going to agree with you, and it's not something to do. And particularly if you've been saying, I don't like this food. And so part of the diffusion process for me was to take this patient away and say, okay, let's go and have a discussion and talk about this and what was going on. And then understanding, okay, you're hungry, you want something to eat. Okay, go and get, I'll go, what do you want to eat? Oh, you want a burger? Okay, fine, I'll get it. Whatever you want, you feed the patient, they're now in a better place to actually have a conversation, to start discussing how you could have handled that better. What do we need to do? How do we put things in place so that you're not in conflict? But again, I want to reiterate that that sort of thing is not acceptable. I'm not sort of condoning that. And I think that's part of, if you're trying to understand somebody's point of view, it doesn't mean that you're necessarily condoning the behavior, but you have to understand the root cause of how we got to where we are so that you can find your way out again. And I think that's where that grace, humility, being able to have empathy, put yourself in somebody else's position, really helps us to communicate and get the best out of each other.
This point you just raised now, so that goes into my next kind of line of conversation. But also, I want to believe this has taught you, your profession rather, has taught you some of these things. Or if I was going to put that directly, what has your profession taught you? Now, with this in mind.
I think above anything else, what the profession has taught me is that people are complex. You know, it's so easy in the world that we live in to be really reductive and just say everything's got to be black and white. You know, you're either a bad person or you're a good person. You know, the world is multicolored, multi-layered, multi-textured. You know, it's really complex. And I think if you, as a human being or as a healthcare professional, don't take the time to appreciate the multiple levels of complexity, I think that's when you can either make the wrong diagnosis, or you don't build trust and people don't give you the information, or you make mistakes that you don't learn from, or complications. So I think this goes back to what I was learning before, which is about reflection, being able to really dissect everything and really understand what are the various contributory factors to these things. And I think sometimes it's a double-edged sword. Sometimes you can go too far down this hole. And for me, I think sometimes it makes it sometimes harder to call out poor behavior because, oh yeah, there must be a reason for this. But I think in the world we live in where we're looking for quick sound bites, you know, it's so easy just to try and reduce something into the lowest common denominator. And that's not human beings. People are complicated, you know, and people have good days and they have bad days. You know, you may be friends one day and not friends another day, you know. And I think inherently, I would like to think that there is good in all of us, you know, and there may be different motivations, which means that it's hard for people to display that goodness always, you know, and that's where if you have an appreciation of complexity, it's less hurtful when you don't necessarily see the best sides of people because you're able to appreciate, look, there are complex things are here.
You've talked about health inequality. I wanted to go in there a bit. And you work a lot with Aboriginal, you know, with Aboriginal Health Service. Walk me through what that means. Health inequality. What does that term literally mean?
So Australia's a really interesting place in that in the UK, densely populated, you're not far from a lot of health services. Here in Australia, the distances are so vast that you've got a lot of remote communities. Often these are Aboriginal patients, but there are non-Aboriginals as well who live in remote areas. What Australia really suffers from in a lot of ways is the tyranny of distance. So a lot of specialists, a lot of the high-end services are all concentrated in Perth. But when you move out, further out you move, the harder it is to access services, particularly when you start thinking about the issues with fuel here and now. So what that translates to for the Aboriginal population is that they're far more likely if they have diabetes and complications of diabetes to have an amputation or to have poorer outcomes. And it's because they don't have early access to a lot of specialist care. But that's just not, and that's also a problem for people who live in rural and remote communities. And so when we talk about health inequality, there's the physical aspect of not being able to actually physically see something or access to services. But I think also there are challenges around cultural safety, particularly for the Aboriginal population, whereby some of their cultural norms and practices when they encounter, healthcare professionals, if they're not respected or they're not understood, then that can manifest as people saying, well, look, they're not interested in their own health. That's not necessarily true. So there may be situations where a family member has died and the patient wants to go to a funeral. That may be right in the middle of their treatment. And I think we as healthcare professionals in a westernized setting of health, we're used to patients saying, okay, well, I'd really like to go, but I'm going to prioritize my health. That's not what tends to happen. There's a strong sense of kin within the Aboriginal community. And so when they go to pay their respects, that is seen as, well, they're just not interested in their health, which is sad, because then that can lead to biases creeping in terms of how we deliver care, what sort of care is being delivered. And so there's this concept of co-design, of working with populations, the Aboriginal health control sector, rural healthcare practitioners, to understand that it's a different world, and how do you best deliver care knowing that there are all these other layers of complexity. And I think that's why I do a lot of the work that I do, which is really, rather than waiting for patients to come to me, I do a lot of outreach work to the Kimberley, and sometimes I go into places like Kalgoorlie to really try and provide a bit of a presence there. And it is one of the most rewarding things that I do in my day-to-day practice, which is to sit with a patient, who has seen me on the TV, on telehealth, and then I go and see them in person, and we've already developed a rapport and a relationship.
How easy has it been for you managing an Aboriginal patient versus a non-African managing an Aboriginal patient?
Difficult to say, but I do think that there is definitely an advantage in being a Black African and working with the Aboriginal population.
Would you rather work with you as against a non-African?
I think there's an instinctive, I get the feeling that there's an instinctive sort of situation where there's an element of trust that comes in because I look similar. But I think beyond that, what really makes a difference, and I have lots of colleagues who are not Black, who work extremely well with the Aboriginal population, in whom they have a huge amount of trust. And I think there's been Black, but there's also been interested and curious and compassionate, which the moment you're able to do that, you can engage, and people then feel comfortable, and they will tell you their story, and then they'll build trust. It's developing the relationships, but I think that there is potentially an advantage in being a Black African to being able to do that. I think it opens a slight door that allows for that to occur.
Let's talk about the relationship between diabetes and our foods. Because reading up your profile and reading up about you, I've been saying a lot of a vascular surgeon, arteries and vein, a lot of the stuff, but also you treat diabetes, and then you're very interested in that relationship between diabetes and our food. Can you walk us through that?
Yeah, so it's a sad fact that, more and more people are getting diabetes, and the reason for that is because of what we're eating, pure and simple. There's a lot of refined sugars there, and we're also becoming more sedentary because we don't need to go out as often as we do, and we've all got Netflix and how many other streaming platforms, so we can just that's right. So that's where sort of that growth in diabetes is coming from. Now, unfortunately, what diabetes does is, through having a state where you've got too much sugar in your blood, or being able to control the sugar levels in your blood, it starts to attack various different organs. So it can attack your eyes, your kidneys, your circulation. It can attack the nerves in your feet as well, so that you lose sensation in your feet. And all of that comes together in a terrible way in the foot, where you have this triad of being more susceptible to infection, unable to feel sensation in the feet, so when you get an injury in your foot, and you've got poor circulation as well. So when you get an injury to the foot and you get infection in the set hole, it can go through your foot like wildfire. damaging lots of tissue in your foot.
Is it particular for foot or maybe arm or
It's particular for foot because that's where you can't really see it. So what the diabetes can do is affect your eyes as well. So people may end up with poor eyesight. And so when you step on something, it's hard to see what's happening on the bottom of your foot. When you wear a shoe, it can rub and cause injuries to the foot, and that's where these problems are. So it is primarily located on the foot. And the biggest cause of amputations in the world is diabetes. Non-traumatic amputations is diabetes. In fact, almost every 20 seconds, somebody in the world is losing their leg because of diabetes. When I came here, I would see some very young people in the Aboriginal population who had the consequences of diabetes. But I would also see a lot of people who were losing their legs because of diabetes. Now, there's a lot that we can do to do that. Number one is prevention and education. But even if we come to the point where the damage is already done, there's a lot that we can do to prevent people having amputations. Because having an amputation is not a good thing. You know, when people have an amputation, the mortality from that is pretty significant, and that's why I've been on a kind of personal crusade to say, well, we're going to end avoidable amputations. And there are lots of other people around the world who are of the same mindset and mentality, and I've had the privilege of meeting, you know, eminent scholars around the world like David Olufemi from the US, and, you know, got some Italian colleagues that I've met, you know, Giacomo Clarici, and, you know, lots of people around the world that I've met who have really been able to support me and who've been able to work together on these areas. And I've also been fortunate that the hospital institution I've worked in has also supported that as well, to really see what we can do to try and minimize amputations in all populations.
I'm going to ask you this. Diabetes, how do we prevent? Talking about preventative measures, what are the measures that if I were to come to you, or before I even get diabetes, what should I be doing? Food-wise, exercise-wise? If you were to advise a patient, what would that be?
Listen, I think, as with everything in moderation. You know, we all know the things that we're eating, which, you know, we shouldn't be eating. You know, if you're going to sit there and you're going to eat a whole pizza by yourself, you know, you're going to get a lot of calories, you know, and you're going to put your body under pressure. If you're going to be constantly feeding yourself, you know, high sugar foods, you're going to be putting yourself under.
When is sugar enough? When is sugar too much? Right? Because on one hand, you get a doctor say, oh, you're low on sugar. And I'm hearing you say sugar now is not good. So when is it too much?
I think that if you're, I don't have sugar in my tea.
Okay.
But I think that if your diet consists primarily of ice creams, you know, you're eating
Carbs, right.
those sort of things that can do. And look, there are some people that are more susceptible, you know, and that's you know, and that's slightly different. But it's the excess which is the problem. And I think that it's hard when you're sitting around and, you know, everywhere you look, you've got things that that have got so much sugar in them. I mean, you go shopping now and it's cheaper to buy processed packaged food and biscuits than it is to buy fresh fruit. And when you think about that, and you think about those families where they have to make a decision and they haven't got much money to make, you know, to make ends meet, you know, you somehow need to get your calories from somewhere, right? So, you know, you can see how that pathway develops. But it's really important to think that diabetes is not a problem of people who are not wealthy. You know, there are a lot of famous people around the world who have diabetes as well. And so it's not something to be stigmatized, is, I guess, where I'm saying. But also, being overweight, sedentary, these are all things that are contributing towards that explosion. So what can you do? Well, I think, you know, become more active. Look at your diet and look at the calories that you're consuming, what type of food you're eating, and there are plenty of self-help, opportunities around there. But I think one of the things that is important is really balance. Having a balanced diet that includes your fiber and your green leaves, as well as your meat and your protein sources as well. And there are all sorts of things that that you do that, and regular exercise.
Thank you. Thank you. Look, we're coming to a close. Let's go like one or two more, and I'll bring it to an end. Look, looking back at your journey from studying engineering, living in the UK, moving over here to Australia, and doing all the things you do the good work you do, what has kept you grounded? If you had to put that in a sentence, what would that be?
That's a hard one. I would say, for me, it has been the mission. By the mission, what I mean, the mission is, what am I here to do? And I'm thinking about the next generation, my children, making sure that they can look back and they can say, yeah, Dad was looking after other people, but we're proud of it. Developing that relationship and having that focus is really, I think, kept me from all of these excesses of, okay, yeah, I can do this and I can do that, and just ever growing wider. It's really about coming back to, what's all this for? And at the end of the day, for me, there's the personal fulfillment of doing what I do, but also, I think, as I said before, there are sacrifices that come with being a healthcare professional, and it has to have been worth it at the end. And that's what I mean by the mission, in terms of being able to say that I'm keeping grounded and remaining focused, because when my kids think back to all of these times when I haven't been around, they can say, well, yeah, he did something with his life and we're proud of him. It's not about me, but the kids understanding what I was doing, when I was doing it, and being proud at the end that their dad was able to do these things.
Do you live in God?
I do. Brought up in a Christian family. I don't. I'm not religious, but I am. I am familiar with that, and I think everybody has their own belief system, and I will respect that. But I wouldn't sort of say, oh yeah, I'm a devout Christian, because that's
Basically, you're not religious. Sorry, just random question.
Yeah.
Basically, you're not religious. What does that mean? So you're not practicing?
Yep.
Okay. But you believe there is a God.
Yes, no, I do. I think that there is. I think there's a lot that science can't explain. There are things that happen which you might say, oh, I was really lucky, but at some level I'm thinking, well, is that some divine intervention which has kind of pushed me one way, pushed another way, that has allowed that to happen? And there's some incredible things that have happened to me in life, and I sometimes just think that can't be by chance. And so, yeah, and it's a hard position to, and I guess I don't really think about it too much, other than say, okay, something's out there. But I haven't sort of gone to the stage where I'm saying, okay, I'm going to start looking at scriptures.
I'll give you not a funny one. One of the very first guests I had on this conversation was a young man.
And the question I asked him was same question. Do you believe in God? He's like, nah. The reason is simple. He doesn't believe there's any God somewhere that makes things happen.
Mm.
That we are the product of our decisions.
Mm.
That whatever he is today, he worked hard for it. He doesn't believe any God did it for him.
Mm.
And his successes, his failures, his own decision as well. So he failed not because one devil made him fail,
Mm.
or there was a God that was allowed that. He just didn't do what he had to do, what he was meant to do,
Mm.
and it didn't work. And for the ones he succeeded in, he did better, and he succeeded. I was like, it's a view. That's perfect.
Yeah, listen, I think that's, for those things where there's a direct relationship, yes, of course you can say that. But I do think that there are sometimes events where you can't possibly have had any influence. And, whether or not people want to call that luck, or say that there's some sort of divine influence, I think that's where I'm erring more towards divine influence. Certainly there's a lot of things where I say, I could have done this or I could have done that. But being able to be in the right place at the right time, seemingly, where good things happen, that's where you start to wonder, okay, was somebody looking out for me? Because there are times when, I'm very, at the very low, fell the exam for a second time, or third time, why did this happen? And then you you go and you perform and you think, okay, yeah, this is
Yeah, and then anything different. It's just the same thing. Yeah. Look, Doc, thank you so much for joining me in this conversation. I hope you had as much fun as I did.
Oh, I did. Listen, it's hard to believe that we've been talking for more than an hour. Things times just seem to have flown by so quickly. But I'm deeply grateful for the opportunity, and if there's anything that I have said tonight that may be of value to somebody and can inspire them, then that's perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you have any question for me?
Yeah, I need to bring my friends next time.
Your friends. I mean, you can. So you have an opportunity to nominate somebody, actually, at least one person. If you got 2-3 persons to nominate,
Yeah,
perfect.
yeah.
Well, I'll give you the opportunity shortly. We'll just round off. Once again, thank you so much for joining me in this conversation. I really appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.